The War of 1812 left the Western Plains relatively free of interference from Washington. The Lakota fought with Crow Indians over horses and hunting rights. Some Sioux engaged in diplomacy with Pawnee and even Kiowa in the south. However, conflict erupted at the edge of the Black Hills of South Dakota. Wintering with the Cheyenne there, these two gradually merging indigenous nations crossed paths with the Kiowa, who were in a habit of traveling to the hills from their southern homeland around the Arkansas River. There they lived in an alliance with the powerful Comanche. Meanwhile, tried to reclaim some power on the plains. To make their point, in 1823 they stormed a Missouri Fur Company trading post, killing trappers and wounding more. Mountain men scrambled to safety, including the famed and incorrigible Hugh Glass, while others rushed downstream to seek reinforcements. Colonel Henry Leavenworth ascended the Missouri River and brought 230 soldiers, 700 Sioux warriors, and a company of mountain men to the Arikara villages on the Grand River in early August. They didn't do much damage, and the Lakota grumbled that the Americans had been too soft. The Arikara nevertheless abandoned their villages and began to seek refuge among the Mandans. Later in the 30s, Arikara also fled south, mingling with the Pawnee. Scalps decorated teepee poles, as was customary on the Great Plains. In the 1830s and 1840s, a broad pattern took shape in the north and west. Lakota clashed frequently with Crows, and also Shoshone, who ventured to hunt on the plains east of the Powder River. In the south, along the Platte and Niobrara, Pawnee, Omaha, Ponca, and Ottos were targets. The Cheyenne tightened their alliance with the Lakota, bringing their combined fighting force to nearly 3,000 warriors, according to Hamalainen's book, Lakota America. The Lakota shifted their operations toward the hills and the Platte Valley, but grew reluctant to carry their loads of hides and pelts to Fort Pierre on the Missouri River. Their envoys demanded that the traders come to them. Accommodating, the American Fur Company eventually created a small movable post. The Ogallala Sioux winter count, recorded for 1831, marked a major event as a white trader brought goods into their camp on a wagon, the first they had ever seen. The company reported 50,000 buffalo robes from the Lakota. Fort Laramie came into being under the leadership of William Sublette. A year later, the first steamboat would make its way to the upper Missouri. The Yellowstone, a steamboat sensation, pushed all the way up to Fort Union near the Missouri-Yellowstone Junction, covering 1,800 miles in less than 3 months. Along came Jacob Astor's American Fur Company, again to dismantle the existing posts and Indian fairs and to build new forts primarily aimed at facilitating the Lakota brand of trading. In 1836, that company bought Sublet's fort and began supplying it with annual wagon caravans from the Council Bluffs and Fort Pierre, both steamboat stops. According to George Catlin, in the 1830s, quote,
"In the heart of their country is one of the most extensive assortment of goods, of whiskey and other saleable commodities, as well as a party of the most indefatigable men, fur traders, who are constantly calling for every robe that can be stripped from the animal's back."
Missouri traders shipped about 100,000 buffalo robes and 25,000 bison tongues down the Missouri River in 1847. Meanwhile, the Lakotas frequented the Black Hills, Paha, Sapa. This was home and a gift from the mystical buffalo calf woman. Paha Sapa became known as North America's paramount bison hunting range, where hunters could find game even when herds were disappearing everywhere else. Cheyenne, who had regularly been hunting in the hills, emerged as the dominant group by the beginning of the 19th century. They formed an alliance with the Arapaho and held a commanding presence until the Lakota filtered up 8 forest-pocketed tributaries of the Missouri in the east: the White, the Bad, the Cheyenne, the Moreau, the Grand, the Cannonball, the Heart, and the Knife Rivers. The South Fork of the Cheyenne River, quote, with its thick cottonwood groves and nearby protective bluffs, was one of those essential river valleys that provided shelter and nourishment during the winter. By early summer, a Sundance, a combined religious and political spectacle, ushered in the hunting season. The elders performed buffalo calling ceremonies and sent out scouts to locate the herds. Western Plains Brule Sioux joined forces with Cheyenne against the Kiowa, while the Ogallala spearheaded campaigns against the Crows. By the late 1820s, Crows already had retreated from the Black Hills into the Powder River country, hundreds of miles to the west, and the Ogallalas and Brule established themselves on the eastern side of the hills. Sans Arc, Miniconjou, Two Kettles, and Hunkpapa had also begun to drift west by the late 1820s. Native leaders, Sitting Bull and Red Cloud, were becoming prominent within their tribal communities. Red Cloud would eventually feature in innumerable eventful confrontations with the white man. He paid perhaps a dozen horses for the right to marry his first wife, Pretty Owl, and married his sixth wife when he was only 24 years old. The number of wives among the Lakota became a key measure of male success. Red Cloud spent almost 20 years raiding before assuming a role as a chief among the Lords of the Plains, the Sioux. As mentioned several times already, the Crows were no pushover along the northern Platte River in the western hills extending past Bear Butte and Bear Lodge, today named Devil's Tower, and including extensive plains along the Powder River all the way to the Yellowstone Country and Bighorn Mountains. The Lakota-Crow conflict was probably one of the longest intertribal fights in American history. Both Indian groups treated places like Devil's Tower, then called Bear Lodge, as a spiritual gathering junction for the obvious reason that the striated rock retained the claw marks of the powerful mythological giant that sought to capture a mystical benefactress who climbed the solitary stone monument. One trader described the Crow warriors as among the most handsome in the West. They were, quote,
all tall, straight, well-formed, with bold, fierce eyes, also dressed elegantly and expensively.
However, the Lakota population was much larger, dwarfing the 5,000 or so Crows clustering in Paha, Sapa, the Black Hills. Francis Parkman, who would later become a travel historian, witnessed some of native behaviors. He referred to the Lakota warriors as superb naked figures, noble savages who fought for national honor and personal glory. After harassing the Crows, Lakota pushed on the Ute, Shoshone, and Flathead villages clustered closer to the Rocky Mountains. Another foe, the Assiniboine, settled on the Missouri in 1837, but smallpox killed almost two-thirds of them. A kind of peacefulness fell over the northern plains between the late 1830s and late 1840s, even as Andrew Jackson and fellows were advancing policies to coerce and force eastern Indians to the designated Indian Territory across the Mississippi, further south. Unfortunately for the central and northern plains tribes, though, in 1848 news of a gold mother lode in California reached the east, and a gold rush began. Until then, fewer than 2,000 California and Oregon-bound overlanders had crossed the plains along the Platte River. But the next year, as many as 27,000 moved across the country. A party of Army Corps of Engineers heading to the Salt Lake came upon some empty teepees on the North Platte, encountering for the first time the corpses of Indians killed by a new deadly bacteria carried west by the overlanders. The Platte Valley was turned into, quote, a boundless city of dead. It was cholera. Salvation to the ill and starving people of the central and northern plains lay in the Black Hills region and the gigantic stump-like formation that rises more than 1,000 feet above the Belle Fourche River. Indians called the rock Mateo Teepee, meaning Bear Lodge or Grizzly Bear Lodge. According to the Kiowa,
their tribe once camped on a stream where there were many bears. One day, 7 little girls were chased by some bears. The girls ran toward the village and narrowly escaped by jumping on a small rock and asking that rock to save them. The rock heard their prayer and grew upwards, pushing the children out of reach of the bears. Some bears jumped at them and scratched the rock with their claws. The children are still in the sky, 7 little stars in a group called the Pleiades.
Devil's Tower also redefined the heart of the Cheyenne culture. The tribe designated a great mountain in the western Dakotas the most sacred place in their universe and named it the hill where the people are taught. The tower also was an object of curiosity to early white explorers, but there is scant record of their encounter with this geological wonder. Lieutenant G.K. Warren's expedition of 1855 passed through the Black Hills en route from Fort Laramie to Fort Pierre, but might not have seen the rock. 2 years later, Warren left Fort Laramie to explore the hills and returned to the Missouri River via the Niobrara. Warren reported seeing Bear's Lodge and Little Missouri Buttes to the north through a spyglass. Captain W.F. Reynolds' Yellowstone expedition passed through the Black Hills region 2 years later, but left no record of sighting the tower. The U.S. Geological Survey Party made a reconnaissance of the Black Hills in 1875 and mentioned the uniqueness of the tower. Colonel Richard Dodge, commander of the military escort, described it as, quote, one of the most remarkable peaks in this or any country. Henry Newt, geological assistant to the expedition, wrote, quote, remarkable structure, its symmetry, and its prominence made it an unfailing object of wonder. It is a great, remarkable obelisk, and it rises 625 feet, almost perpendicular, from its base. Its summit is so entirely inaccessible that the energetic explorer, to whom the ascent of an ordinary difficult crag is but a pleasant pastime, standing at its base, could only look upward in despair of ever planting his feet on the top. In his book entitled The Black Hills, published in 1876, Colonel Dodge called it Devil's Tower, explaining, quote,
the Indians call this shaft the Bad God's Tower, a name adopted with proper modification by our surveyors.
In less than a decade after the survey party passed through the region, the first settlers entered the western end of the hills. The Laramie Treaty of 1868 guaranteed this region to the Indians. In 1874, in violation of this treaty, Major General George A. Custer, he was both a general in the Civil War and a lieutenant colonel of the 7th Cavalry, led a reconnaissance expedition into the area. His reports of the discovery of gold attracted an invasion by miners. When negotiations broke down in 1875, troops were withdrawn and the miners and settlers poured into the region. Custer City and Deadwood sprung up overnight. The next year, 1876, the Indians were compelled to cede the Black Hills and most of their lands in Wyoming to the white man.